Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Monica Ortiz Uribe. Climate change is affecting the way farmers and ranchers interact with their land. This month, the Obama administration announced the creation of 7 regional climate hubs. Their task is to research how a changing climate will impact agriculture. One of those 7 hubs is based right here in Las Cruces at the Jornada Experimental Range. To talk about the new project, I've invited 2 guests, hydrologist Rango and Phil King, a professor of civil engineering here at New Mexico State University. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So Al, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what are these climate hubs and what are they supposed to do? How are they going to work?
Okay, there are 7 regional climate hubs across the United States, and we're in the southwestern climate hub, and our job is to provide climate change information and also some perhaps remedies for the farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners, and in doing so attempt to allow them to maintain their current high agricultural productivity in the face of climate change.
So as the regional hub, what range do you cover? What region do you cover?
We have 6 states, and most of them are semi-arid, but probably it's the most diverse hub because it has New Mexico and Arizona that have large deserts, Nevada and Utah also having deserts. Southern part of California has a desert as well, but that is the unusual state to a degree because it's the most productive agricultural state in the country. And then there's Hawaii, which is a whole different thing altogether.
Right, and so it's going to be based at this Jornada Experimental Range, which is where you work, correct? Right. So tell us a bit about the Jornada and what is it and what sorts of things you do there.
It was formed by USDA in 1912. It's collected data since then, unimpaired for quite a long period of time. We have a long database. And we study originally primarily grazing situations where different cattle were brought in, and we took a look at how much damage they would do to the landscape in years that had little rainfall or large amounts of rainfall. We still do a lot of that, but we're extending that database all the time, and we do hydrology, ecosystem studies, rainfall studies, and things like that are more than the actual just grazing effects.
So this is over 100 years of data that you've collected since the creation of the Jornada. So does that, I imagine that gives you some perspective when you look at looking at a big picture scenario.
Right, it allows us to at least compare years, and by now, over those 100 years, we've pretty well calibrated how many cattle you can put out there and still not cause a lot of damage. So we have that back data that we use.
Okay, well, why don't you give us an idea of what exactly climate change is and how it plays out here in the Southwest?
In the Southwest, like many arid and semi-arid regions of the world, we depend a lot on the snowmelt coming from the mountain watersheds. And in fact, the climate change also has shown that we're going to have warmer temperatures. That's during the time that the snowfall comes, which means there won't be as much of it as snow, but more will become rain. And then the snowpack that does build up in the mountains with the warmer temperatures will melt off a lot sooner, and we won't have as much snowmelt runoff in the streams.
So Dr. King, your work, tell us about how your work looks into the amount of snowmelt, and why is snowmelt important to farmers here in southern New Mexico? How does it impact them?
Well, in addition to my my role as a professor, and a lot of my research has been in river modeling, groundwater modeling, things like that in this area. But in addition to all that, I also work as a consultant for Elephant Butte Irrigation District, which is the irrigation district that delivers water from Caballo Dam down to the Texas state line. And I've been working with them for nearly 20 years now. And one of the things that I do is I tell them early on how much of a water supply to plan for. And for the past decade, my prognosis has been so bad that they've come to call me Dr. Doom.
Oh dear.
And what we're seeing though is a real departure from the historical behavior of the watershed. It's not just that we're getting less snowpack, it's even for the level of snowpack we are getting, we're getting less runoff. And so to put this in perspective, the year 2013 was by far the worst single year in the nearly 100 years of the Rio Grande project here. Our farmers, a full allocation is 3 acre feet per acre. This
so
year,
3 feet of irrigation water per acre of land
right,
is what they get in a...
in a normal or full supply year. Normal is probably a bad word, the incorrect word, a full supply year. This year it was 3.5 inches.
So from 3 feet to 3 inches.
3.5 inches, and it was the smallest release from the reservoirs. It was the shortest release. We only had water releasing from Caballo for 47 days. Normally it's 8 months. So it is a complete shock to the system.
And what is, so all of that, so the water that's in the two lakes, Elephant Butte and Caballo, is coming from this snowmelt that's, where is the snowmelt coming from?
Well, it's coming from the mountains of northern New Mexico and also from the mountains of southern Colorado.
So it's this, so the river, the Rio Grande River that flows, that starts up in southern Colorado and makes its way all the way down to southern New Mexico and irrigates the crops we've got down here, is dependent on the snowfall that falls in these mountains and melts.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell me, what's the state of the lakes then in terms of their depth?
The state of the lakes it is going to be another very short season. It probably won't be quite as bad. Instead of 3.5 inches, maybe our farmers will get 6 inches, but forget about 3 feet. That's just not happening. Also, the water that is in storage right now is mostly from that September monsoon we had. The monsoon event that came in further south, than the headwaters of the Rio Grande, but it did produce some pretty good runoff into both Elephant Butte and Caballo.
Okay. Well, Al, why don't you tell us then about the snowmelt? Like, have you been measuring the amount of snowmelt, and what have you discovered?
Well, we've been measuring the amount of snow cover in the mountains using satellite data, and in fact we have put in some additional sensors in the mountain watersheds. But what we've been discovering is that there's not a lot of snow melt to be had because of it's sort of a longer term thing that's going on. We're getting less snow because there's more rainfall events, and then we get earlier runoff in the spring. Our peak runoff used to be something around beginning of April, and now it's like the beginning of March.
So you put together a graph with some of the data you have. Can you tell us a bit about what you discovered?
Yeah, the graph that you see is one in which the darker area is what we would normally expect from one of the Rio Grande subwatersheds, and the yellow one is one that we've seen in more recent years and we'll see in the future as well. It's going to be a reduced water supply.
So give me an idea in like a 10-year range, how much has the snowfall declined in the last 10 years, say?
I would say that it is difficult to say exactly how much it's declined in those 10 years, but the graph that you saw, it looks like it's about now down to 50% of what normal would be, or even 30% in some cases.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for farmers in southern New Mexico? I mean, they've got less water to work with, but they've still got to make a living and grow crops. How are they making by?
Well, it's very difficult. Crops, of course, take water to produce. And we did capture some monsoon runoff this year, but with the monsoon runoff, you get a few tens of thousands of acre feet. With a good snowmelt year, at least back in the day, you could get 1 million acre feet. So it's just a different order of magnitude. You know, if this persists, clearly agriculture will have some major adaptation to do. Right now, they are making up the difference with groundwater pumping. But the groundwater is hydrologically connected to the river. The river and the irrigation system associated with it are what recharge that aquifer. So if you don't have this runoff water coming in to be part of your surface water supply, which recharges the aquifer, you get into a mined aquifer situation that we're in at this point. We're seeing year after year decline in groundwater levels because we're making up for that shortage of surface water with a temporary fix, which is groundwater.
So Al, you're at the Climate Hub. Your task is to help these farmers and ranchers adapt to these new circumstances. Can you tell me about what your first project is as the Southwest Climate Hub?
Well, first of all, we'd hope to continue to use people from the Agricultural Extension Service to get out the message that we can give them, and that's as good of data as we can get. And then also what we think it looks like in future years. We've actually been working with climate models to come up with, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what the temperature and rainfall would be. And so we'll attempt to analyze that data, give it to the ag extension people, and they'll present it to the farmers and ranchers who are interested.
And what sorts of research are you doing right now that's related to Climate Hub, to climate change?
We're trying to finish up a project that just did finish, but we have a lot of papers that we're trying to get out on the various sub-basins of the Rio Grande and which basins are productive as you move up into Colorado, and it looks like all of them are affected by this climate change, and it will be good data though to provide them so they can see what the effects would be on the different watersheds.
And so I understand you're also looking into forecasting how much snow melt has fallen, and how much of that will end up as irrigation water in the river. Is that correct?
Right. Each basin will have a certain amount of melt that occurs, and if we can forecast each of those, we might have some information that will be quite useful at different points along the river, and those ranchers or farmers will be interested in at least what it looks like for their basin where they get their water from.
So for the farmers and ranchers, how is that important, this forecast?
Well, it's absolutely crucial. You have to make a decision in December or January if you're going to plant a given parcel of land or what your stocking rate is going to be on your ranch, things like that. So you have to have some reliable information on what's going to come. None of this forecasting makes any more water. The best we can do is at least tell them what's coming so that they can plan for it and hopefully minimize the damage. If they get a very rosy outlook for a runoff and they plant their full acreage and lose half of it, it can bankrupt them. So they need good information as early as possible on what the water outlook is. They don't want to overextend themselves and then not have the water, but they also do not want to have water that they have not prepared to put to use.
I see. And so then what kinds of forecasting models are available now, and are they doing a good job of giving farmers the information they need to know? Well,
the models that probably have the longest history are the put together by various federal agencies, and they're what are called statistical models, and they are calibrated to previous conditions. In other words, they just using statistics, not really getting into the underlying physical processes. They're inherently assuming that the future is going to look like the past. And so if we can capture what happened in the past and forecast to the future, then we've got a pretty good estimate.
And is it?
It's not working. What we've seen over the last few years is they come out with the first forecast in January, and it's always a bit too rosy. February it comes down, and I mean they fall off the cliff because they're overestimating early, and then trying to catch up the rest of the year. So it's really an area of substantial need to try to get forecasting models that can capture these changes in the fundamental hydrologic processes.
So how is the data that you're collecting improving upon this other data that's already available?
Well, we would like to provide data, and we will, to a degree, provide data collected during the climate change effect taking place, which would be a better use of the data in the models, the statistical models. And in addition, the climate models that are currently being run are big improvements over what they used to be, so that the climate models can take into account the climate change, and we should be able to use those data to improve the forecast somewhat as well.
All right, all right. And what advice are I don't know if you're at that stage yet, but to be able to advise the farmers and ranchers on how to change or how to adapt given the new conditions, and neither one of you can answer this question.
Well, I would say that probably the people that know that best as what the farmers and ranchers need are people that work for the Ag Extension Service and also the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And so we would be asking them, what kind of improvements do they need for us to come up with, for them to give to the farmers and ranchers? So we would rely on them a lot.
What are you seeing on the ground as far as what are farmers and ranchers doing in these last 4 years?
Well, again, they can temporarily mask the effects with increased groundwater pumping, but again, that is a finite resource. It does not make new water. It's just really borrowing against future years' water supply. But I think that we have got the message out there loud and clear, at least with the farmers here in southern New Mexico, that this appears as a drought right now, but you may also want to consider this as a permanent shift to a more arid climate. In other words, if this doesn't come back, the future water supply will not support the level of agricultural production that we had in the 1980s and 1990s when there was water everywhere. So you don't get anywhere sugarcoating these things. People need to understand what the future bears, and so we do our best to get that out, and a lot of the decision making then comes up to the individual farmer or rancher.
And what does that mean for people who live in cities that get their produce from the grocery store and don't really think about where it comes from, or go home and open the tap in their kitchen sink and wash their dishes and think, oh, there's water, so it seems to be okay?
Well, that's a good question. We have gotten, unfortunately, disconnected from our production systems for both food and water, and I think a lot of the adaptation that we will have to go through in order to adjust to a permanent shift to a more arid climate is to reestablish that connection so that folks do understand where their food and water comes from and understand the fragility of it, and that we are a desert people. We are not the East Coast or Southern California. We are an arid climate and need to live more like it.
And now, what does it mean for the lower snowpack and the lower snow melt? What does that mean for the health of the rivers and of the ecosystem? Not beyond what the farmers and ranchers are doing, but just for the ecosystem of the Southwest.
Well, the lower elevations that normally would have snowpack under the conditions of climate change will now not have snowpack. And there'll only be the upper elevations that will have some snow that the farmers and ranchers can depend on. So I would think that if you were a fisherman, you wouldn't have a very good time in the lower elevations anymore, where you may have had it like 20 years ago. So I would think that the quality of ecosystem services and the quality of life will be reduced some.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what other research are you looking into as part of this, as part of the network of climate hubs?
We're looking. Other research that's going on out at Jornada is that we're looking at different types of remote sensing data from what they call unmanned aerial vehicles. We have several of them that we fly, and we fly them over some watersheds out there. And we're getting a better understanding of soil moisture from that, and we can sort of predict a little bit better using the soil moisture data what's going to happen in these dry conditions. Now, we don't fly them in the mountains where there's snowpack. We could, but that may come along eventually after we're sort of had experience with these vehicles.
So this is another measuring tool per se. So
Yes, it is. It's rather than a satellite, it's a low elevation tool that has a resolution of like 5 centimeters, a very high resolution. So we have a different capability there than we have from satellites.
And this would also measure groundwater and be able, yes?
Not groundwater necessarily. There are other instruments that actually you can put on the ground out there to get an idea of the groundwater, but from the airplanes it would not be groundwater that we'd be measuring. But we can get soil moisture in the upper layers of the soil and other things like changes in vegetation, which are definitely important, and they can be caused by climate changes.
Okay. And what are some of the other technical challenges that present themselves for the irrigation district as a result of less water, of the fewer availability?
Well, times of shortage really change people's attitudes towards their water supply, and shall we say towards their neighbors. When you get an increasingly short supply, you need to measure much more precisely. You need to operate much more efficiently. And so not only do you have a smaller water supply, but you also have much less flexibility with it. We have farmers, for example, who would like to grow vegetables, which take frequent light irrigations. But if our entire on season is 47 days, basically they better take the water when it's there. So it's really changing the operations to try to get the most out of that small water supply, which tends to be a little unpopular, but I think farmers generally understand what it is we're trying to do, and that the problem is that there's no water.
I see. And so are there, do you see some farmers that are scaling back now, or is that something that we'll probably see in the future?
Oh, that's well underway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give me some examples of what?
Well, interestingly, the way we can tell what is planted on a given field is when they order water, we record what the crop is. If they don't order water, we don't record what crop is on there. So a lot of fields don't order any water. They're 100% groundwater, and the farmer will take that surface water and put it on a different field. But in general, I would guess we're probably down to about 2/3 of our cropped acreage right now.
From how long before?
Well, from the full water rated acreage of about 90,000 acres down to say 60,000, something like that.
So give me an idea of when the irrigation season starts. When do farmers start preparing to irrigate?
Oh, they're already irrigating right now.
I
But
see.
there's no water in the river, so this is all groundwater that you're seeing out there now.
I see. When will the river water start to come down? Is that
June 1st, which is, that was what it was last year. It was the latest start ever, and I expect to see something similar this year.
And so, Al, you were saying that with the fewer amount of snowpack, that's resulting in earlier snowmelt. Yet you're saying that you had a late release last year. So help me understand the.
Okay, so the release is controlled by the reservoirs and orders given to them for releases, whereas the snowmelt runoff that we talk about is actually under whatever temperature conditions can melt the snowpack, and we're having warmer temperatures a lot earlier in the year. So, and that data, that snowmelt is caught in the reservoirs, so it becomes part of the release that Phil was talking about.
And so once that water, you hold on to that water in the reservoir for some time before you release it.
Right.
Okay.
And the reason we wait until so late in the year is because we know we just can't run for 8 months. There isn't that much water. So we're going to have a short run. We want to use that short run in the hottest time of the year. So June into July is usually our peak demand. So we can get by with groundwater before and after that, but we really need the surface water in the system to do that big demand period in June and July.
Okay. Well, just to wrap up, Al, I want to ask you about what are some potential solutions that people can come up with given the situation. I know you'd mentioned in northern New Mexico the acequia system there might provide some sort of a solution. Can you tell us about that briefly?
Well, it's a natural system, and the snowmelt is close to the canals that they use, so that they'll be getting the water fairly quickly, and it's a run-through system that is put onto the fields, and eventually it will run off back into the stream at some point downstream. And of course other users would then have a chance to use that water. And I mean it's a system that's been used for 400 years in New Mexico, and so I think it would be a good one to at least encourage. And they do have some senior water rights, so they could use the water that's given to them.
Very good. Well, I'd like to thank the two of you for coming on the show today. Any final words to share as we close up?
I would just ask Phil, is there any chance that we'd be paying more for water in the future?
I think ultimately that will happen. As it gets more, as the demand gets more competitive, we will see increases in prices.
Very good. Well, thank you two very much.
Welcome.
This has been Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Monica Ortiz Uribe.